Welcome to Testmaking and Assessment for English Teachers, sponsored by the Embassy of the United States and Akita International University. My name is James Sick, and I will be the professor for this course. For each course module, I will record a short lecture which you can view at a time that is convenient for you. There will also be some reading assignments, online discussion forums, and some test-making assignments which you will upload to the course and share. Let's begin by going over the course goals. Our main goal is to learn how to make better assessments for the language learning classroom. All teachers need to make tests, and making a good language test can present particular problems. In order to improve our test-making skills, we will spend time critiquing and improving multiple choice and short answer test items. As the course progresses, we will examine and discuss various methods for assessing the language skills. Finally, we want to gain a better understanding of some basic theory of language testing. Theory of testing is a rather technical subject and will involve some technical terms and vocabulary. This website provides a glossary to help you review and remember the testing vocabulary. Making use of these testing terms, however, will make it easier to discuss the pros and cons of various approaches for assessing the language skills, as well as for critiquing test items. Therefore, this first module will begin with an overview of testing theory. This lecture will present a summary of some basic testing and assessment terms and the 5 principles of good assessment described in Chapter 2 of Language Assessment, Principles and Classroom Practices by Brown and Abewickrama. I have uploaded a scan of Chapter 2, which you can download for the reading assignment. I recommend that you try to read it either before or after this lecture. Let's begin with a very simple but important vocabulary distinction: test versus assessment. In your mind, are these different or are they synonyms? In most teachers' minds, the terms are different. A test is a specific activity where students provide answers to questions with a time limit and other conditions such as no open books, no notes, no speaking to other test takers, etc. An assessment reports a teacher's judgment about a student's performance, such as an essay, a speech, or class participation during an entire semester. However, when assessments are used for calculating grades, tests and assessments have a lot in common. In language testing theory, tests and assessments are often treated as related but different activities. Tests produce a numerical score from a set of questions called items. Tests are considered objective because the score is derived by simply counting the right and wrong answers. That is, the teacher only judges the answers as correct or incorrect. He or she does not need to judge the overall quality of the answer. Fairness is highly valued in Japanese culture. Often, objective is considered to be more fair because it substitutes counting for judgment. However, the difference between a so-called objective test and a subjective assessment might not be as great as we assume. A test designer makes a subjective decision about what to include on the test. It may be someone's bad luck that what the test designer included was part of the content she didn't have time to study. Assessments are evaluations of a performance. A teacher or a judge must make a decision about the quality of the performance, such as exceptional, very good, fair, or weak. Performance assessments are subjective because judgments can vary from teacher to teacher or even time to time. But performance assessments can be guided and standardized using a rubric and calibration training. A rubric is a detailed guide to what to look for when judging a performance. Calibration training is when several judges get together and practice making assessments until they are confident they are judging in the same way. We will learn more about rubrics and calibration in coming lessons. In our Introduction to Language Assessment Theory, we will discuss 5 important principles of assessment. These 5 principles can guide the design of good and appropriate language assessment and help us evaluate the quality of commercial tests, such as the TOEFL and IELTS. The 5 principles are practicality, authenticity, validity, reliability, and washback. We are going to step through and discuss the 5 principles one by one, but with particular emphasis on the most difficult: validity, reliability, and practicality. Let's begin with validity. Validity answers the question, are we truly assessing what we believe we are? Is our assessment on target? Is it truly a test of communication or reading comprehension, for example? To answer those questions, we need to think clearly about several points. First, have we clarified in our minds what we wish to test? We are testing Unit 6 of the textbook, for example, is rather vague. It is important to test whether targeted vocabulary or grammar structures in the textbooks have been mastered. But in communicative language teaching, we really need to ask ourselves what skill or real-world language functions we are targeting. Are we testing skills, such as ability to talk about the weather that can be applied in the real world? Once we are clear about what it is we want to test, we can ask ourselves, do irrelevant factors interfere? For example, background knowledge for a listening or reading test? For multiple choice tests especially, can the problem be answered by eliminating illogical choices without understanding the text? Does another skill play an important role? For example, understanding the prompts for a speaking or writing test? Reliability concerns whether the assessment is accurate or reproducible. The easiest way to conceptualize it is to ask the question, would a student get the same score if he or she took the test a second time or was marked by a different grader? If repeated tests do not give very similar scores, we have to wonder whether the assessment is due to the nature or design of the assessment rather than the student's true ability. Reliability might be a problem with a subjective speaking assessment, such as a speech or some recorded responses to spoken questions. A group of graders, unless they work together closely, might give slightly different or sometimes very different scores to the same speech. In other words, the speaking assessment is not exactly reproducible. However, that is not as bad as it seems. Test scores, such as multiple choice tests, are also not 100% reliable. Students' scores, which we hope are good indicators of their skill or ability, can vary due to lucky or unlucky guessing, carelessness, different conditions in the room, etc. When we judge the reliability of speaking assessments, which will always require subjective judgments, let's keep in mind that so-called objective tests are also never 100% reliable. Reliability and validity are closely related, and at times the two principles overlap. Generally, however, validity is concerned with the language content that the student must read or listen to, or the language that students produce, and reliability is concerned with the grade or score that we arrive at. Let's think of some examples to help understand how validity and reliability can overlap. First, the test on the left is reliable but has poor validity. It is reliable because the dots are close together to indicate that when the test is taken many times, the test takers will get very similar scores. However, it is not valid because even though the dots are falling closely together, they are missing the center. This indicates that the test might actually be testing a different skill from what the test designer intended. An example is Part 2 of the TOEIC listening test. If you are familiar with the TOEIC, Part 2 is a multiple-choice test where the test taker hears a spoken statement or question and then must choose the best response. The test scores are reliable because they are reproducible. If a test taker takes this test several times, he or she will get almost the same score each time. But what is this problem testing? If the test taker heard that statement or question in the real world, would he or she be able to produce this response? Possibly, but probably not. For that reason, we say the test has low validity. It may be testing a test-taking skill. It might not be testing a real-world communication ability. Next, let's consider a test problem that has low validity and low reliability. This is shown on the target because the dots kind of circle the center, but they are far apart. They are not very much on target and they are not producing consistent scores. What kind of test or assessment might have low validity and low reliability? An example might be asking a pair of students to perform a very short role play. This assessment could have low validity because it might demonstrate what the students could do in the real world. For example, a student might be held back due to a weak partner or an unfamiliar role or topic. In addition, this assessment might have low reliability because the teacher must make a judgment about the performance based on a short sample of language. A student might do much better with a different topic, a different partner, or even a different teacher making the judgment. For that reason, we can say that this problem has low validity and low reliability. When a test is not reliable and not valid, it is most often due to very poor reliability. Most testing experts agree that a test can be reliable but not valid, but cannot be considered valid if the scores are very unreliable. This is because we cannot claim a test is testing something relevant to learning if the scores are nearly random or due almost entirely to non-relevant factors, such as when teacher gave the grade or the quality of the sound system in the testing room. Some examples that come to mind are a test that is a multiple choice test that is just too long and difficult for the students, so most of what makes up their scores is due to chance, that is, lucky guessing. Another example might be a speaking test where a group of teachers grade independently and have their own quite different criteria for grading. For example, one teacher gives a lot of points for fluency and pronunciation and is very tolerant of grammar mistakes, while another teacher is tolerant of poor pronunciation but marks down for grammar errors. In such a case, even though the test design seems to have content validity, it's difficult to argue that we are validly testing a particular skill if the main factor determining a student's grade is which teacher marked their essay or speech. Now, to make an assessment both reliable and valid usually requires a lot of time and resources. For example, having students engage in a lengthy conversation with several of their peers while they are observed and graded by two teachers who have invested some time discussing and agreeing on the criteria they will use for grading. In that case, we would feel confident students are getting an ample opportunity to demonstrate their true communicative ability, and the score they get is mostly due to their own performance, rather than differences among teachers about what is important. And that brings us to practicality. Practicality involves the degree to which a test is doable. Teachers are very busy, often have rather large classes to manage, and we always need to consider whether the demands of the test are the best use of our time. For example, how much teacher time is needed to administer and mark the assessment? Is the assessment a good use of teachers' time? Are there other costs, such as time needed to consult, calibrate, or train teachers to administer or score the assessment? Are extra resources or facilities needed, such as computers, recording equipment, or extra rooms? What is the cost to students in time taken from instruction? Can we argue that the assessment is a good use of students' time? Finally, authenticity. Authenticity concerns whether the test provides an opportunity for test takers to engage with natural or authentic language. For example, is the language used in the test modern? Is it testing idioms that went out of style 30 years ago, or grammar structures that were used in Victorian novels but rarely encountered in modern spoken English? Is the language we are asking students to produce natural? For example, do speaking tasks encourage students to answer in complete sentences, even though a complete sentence would not be the natural response of a native speaker? Finally, do assessment tasks resemble or replicate real-world tasks? For example, writing a response to an email is a fairly common real-world task. Completing word puzzles, however, is not a task that most language users are required to do. Here is an example of two test problems that demonstrate differences in authenticity. Problem A is testing knowledge of English word order. Based on an L1 translation, test takers must order the words in English and indicate that they ordered them correctly by writing the words in the correct place. This kind of test problem is sometimes used in Japanese university entrance exams. It is known to be reliable, and it is probably a valid test of English grammar and translation skills. However, in the real world, does anyone ever have to do a task like this? Probably not. Therefore, it is not an authentic task. Problem B, on the other hand, is a test problem used in the paper-based TOEFL. Test takers must identify which of the underlined words or phrases is an error. Reading through your essays or other real-world writing tasks to find errors is something that every good language learner must do. Because this task resembles proofreading or checking for errors in the real world, it is authentic. In speaking tasks, teachers sometimes ask students to respond using a complete sentence rather than a short yes or no answer. Do you think that is a valid way to test speaking skill? Do you think it is an authentic way to test speaking skill? Why or why not? Finally, let's talk about washback. Washback refers to the impact the test has on the entire system of teaching and learning. Washback affects what students perceive as important, what teachers will stress in lessons, how administrators evaluate teachers and course developers, how parents view success of the program. For example, university entrance exams have tremendous washback. Changes in entrance exams can affect all of the above points. A good example is the center test used in Japan. In the late 1990s, adding a listening section to the center exam greatly boosted the importance of listening and oral communication in high schools. If the elite universities add speaking assessments to their entrance exams, it will have tremendous washback on high school English teaching. It is important to consider all of the 5 principles when making tests and assessments. However, it is also important to realize that we usually cannot have all 5. We must usually compromise on something in order to have a practical test. Objective tests, such as multiple-choice grammar tests, tend to be reliable and practical, but they lack validity and authenticity. One-to-one interview tests are valid tests of speaking, but with untrained raters are unreliable. We can make them reliable by training raters extensively, but that may not be practical. What to do? The sad thing is that a language test that is both reliable and valid will take a lot of time to mark and administer, so it may not be practical. If we find ways to save time, such as having students speak in groups, we will likely lose validity or reliability. That is life. These are decisions that a teacher must make. This is the end of the lecture for Module 1. If you haven't already, please try to read the chapter by Brown and Abewickrama. After you have finished, please open the discussion forum for Module 1 and start a new discussion. Follow the instructions in the forum.